Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Rachel Dolan, a movement disorder specialist and vice president of medical communications at the Michael J. Fox Foundation. I'll be your moderator this evening for a very special edition of our third Thursday webinar. You're able to submit questions through the hour, and you should see a Q&A box near the middle of your screen. You can type your questions there, and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can. We're also providing the slides from today's webinar for download. You should see a box called Resource List on your screen. You can click on the link there, and the document will open in a new browser window. You can save or print from there. Today we're tackling a very popular topic, exercise and Parkinson's disease. And we have some very special guests joining us. On the phone with us is Jimmy Choi. Jimmy was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at age 27 in 2003. And he's done countless races and exercise events raising money for Parkinson's research through our grassroots fundraising arm, Team Fox. Earlier this week, Jimmy appeared for the second time on NBC's obstacle competition, American Ninja Warrior. Jimmy, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Jimmy, good. I should also say Jimmy is joining us from the Czech Republic, where it is currently 1 a.m. So if he fades, it's not because it's Parkinson's sleeping problem. We also have Heather Cianci, who's a physical therapist and founder of the Dan Aaron Parkinson's Rehabilitation Center at Pennsylvania Hospital. Heather, we're so happy to have you join us.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
And later this hour, we'll be joined by Akbar Gbajabiamila. Akbar is host of American Ninja Warrior and a member of the Michael J. Fox Foundation Board of Directors. His dad lives with Parkinson's and he's gotten very involved in the community. So stay tuned for our conversation with Akbar. We're going to kick off our conversation talking generally about exercise for Parkinson's. What does it do to help manage the disease? What type of exercise can help? And how can you get started? Later this hour, we'll talk more with Jimmy about his journey through American Ninja Warrior and hear from Akbar on his experience with Parkinson's and exercise. So we've got a lot to get to, so we're going to dive right in. So on our first slide here, we're going to talk about how does exercise help Parkinson's. So Heather, I'm going to start with you. We talk a lot about exercise, whether or not we have Parkinson's. We know it's very important for overall well-being, for brain health, for well-being, like I said, for boosting your mood, for bone health. And on that first point there, we talk about promoting brain health. And there's been a lot of talk about, can it be neuroprotective? Can it slow progression of the disease? And we see these kind of cellular mechanisms that can boost activity of trophic factors, the fertilizer that helps keep our brain cells healthy. It can increase production of the mitochondria, the cell powerhouses, our energy sources. And we've heard a lot of studies on the treadmill and, whatever exercise you might want to do, that exercise could potentially slow the progression of disease. It could slow our motor symptoms. Is there anything you can add on top of that?
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things that people can recognize about exercise is that it truly can take place whether you are newly diagnosed and you are young onset, like when Jimmy started, or if you're in the middle stages of the disease, or if you're in the later stages. So there is a type of exercise and mobility and functionality that anyone can do with Parkinson's disease. It's just finding what is best for you and typically being coached by someone like a physical or occupational therapist who can really help to pinpoint what's going to be best for you.
And we talked also about the point that exercise is really as important as the medications you take or the surgery you have. It's really a cornerstone of the management of your disease. It's one of the points of your treatment regimen. And we see there in the second bullet that it can really ease your symptoms, whether they're motor symptoms or non-motor symptoms. So tell us a little bit more about that. Take us through how exercise can help the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, no matter what symptoms you have.
Absolutely, Rachel. We like to say in our clinic that exercise is medicine, and it truly is a 50-50 split. We want our patients to be optimized on their medication, but also getting the optimal function and fitness to really help what you said, the motor symptoms. So when we're talking about motor symptoms, we're talking about difficulties that people will be having with walking, with their gait. Many people will struggle with episodes of freezing of gait where it's very difficult to get started and move. We know that people have rigidity and stiffness and tightness. We also know that balance is affected and that falls can be a very big problem with people living with Parkinson's. And the research really does show that the right physical therapy and fitness program can really impact and help to decrease the amount of falls, to improve people's gait, to improve their quality of life. And also, I think what's really important is their confidence, to believe that they can do more and they can push themselves. And when we're talking about the non-motor symptoms, we're talking about things like people's mood, their cognition, how quickly they're able to change their thought process and focus on what they're doing. And again, we're really fortunate that the research does indicate that, again, the right type of exercise will really help to promote improvement in those things and may actually slow down how these changes occur in the brains of people with Parkinson's disease. So exercise is very multimodal, meaning that it can impact the body and the mind and the spirit in many different ways in a very positive direction.
So I want to make one caveat point. You're not saying that exercise is a replacement for medication. It's just as important as the medication. You should be doing it in tandem, but it doesn't replace your medication. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct, Rachel. It should be really a 50-50 split. One does not work well without the other.
And you should start it just as, just at the time you're diagnosed, getting started as soon as possible.
I've had many patients say to me, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and I was handed a prescription for medication. I wish I would have been handed a prescription for physical therapy and exercise. And it's absolutely just as important. As soon as you are diagnosed, it's not too early to start physical therapy and an exercise regimen. You're probably better off if you start earlier in the course of the disease. But even if you haven't, we can absolutely have an impact later on in the disease progress.
And Heather, I want to get back to some of the things you talked about, but Jimmy, I want to bring you in because you talked a lot about how exercise helps some of your symptoms. So tell me a little bit about how exercise has helped your motor symptoms. You mentioned exercise has helped your balance and strength and muscle memory. Tell us how exercise has worked for you.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that when I exercise, my advice to everybody is that you exercise with a purpose. Meaning, I always go into my training sessions with something that I want to work on. And really early on, when I was 240 pounds and walking with a cane, I did fall a lot back then, about 7 years ago. And I knew that, falling down and getting up it has been a challenge for me. So in the gym, when I was working out, my purpose was to make myself stronger so that I can get up when I do fall, and also make myself more confident that if I do fall, I know how to brace myself. So I started doing push-ups, right? And if you think about push-ups, then it's a way of getting up from the ground, building those muscles that can help you push up off the ground so you can get back up. And then when I became better at doing push-ups, I started doing burpees, and that's a move where I force myself to fall down and then get myself back up. So I go into every training session, and that's just a single example, right? But I go into every time I train, I work on something that I need to work on to get myself better. I've attended many different types of classes with people with Parkinson's, and I've seen people that may have the freezing gait, and they're working with their trainers or physical therapists on just putting up obstacles, mocking obstacles around, something that they have to step over, and just forcing that big movement, exaggerating that movement. And just doing that will build your muscle memory. So when you are encountered with those situations in real life, your muscles know how to handle it without you necessarily have to think about it if you've done it so many times over and over again.
So Heather, can you build on that a little bit? Because we do get questions a lot about exercise for freezing or falling, because those are a big problem in Parkinson's. Medications, as you know, don't really help balance and walking problems as much as we'd like them to. And so often it becomes exercise and physical therapy that are the prescribed medication or regimen that help these most. So what do you tell people to do for these kinds of problems?
Absolutely. I think one of the first things I'd like to touch back on was what Jimmy said. It needs to be sort of goal-directed. So whatever that challenge is that you're having, we're going to help to base our program off of that. So one of the first things we do is that assessment of the person to see, okay, is it because the step size is too small? Is it because the person is having a fear of falling? Is it because their reaction time isn't fast enough? So there are absolutely wonderful programs that are out there. One that comes to mind is LSVT Big, and that is a program where we really work with patients on making those large amplitude movements, kind of like Jimmy was talking about, getting that full range of motion and really getting people to get the muscle memory as to how big of a step they should take. And that's a big problem with Parkinson's, and why the freezing happens is because that initiation of movement is so slow and so small. So if we can direct people to make bigger amplitude movements, if we can get people to think more about how they're doing what they're doing and increase their focus on that, that's something that's very helpful. There are different techniques for balance, such as we have patients who do Tai Chi. Any kind of agility training can be very good, and people are probably well aware of the things that are going on now with boxing, and boxing is not just good from an aerobic standpoint, but there's a lot of footwork that is involved with boxing that people aren't aware of. So, you know, depending on what level that person is, we have a variety of wonderful exercises that we can really choose from to help people with the gait and the balance. There are a lot of particular specialty movements that we use with people with freezing of gait, but it would be much too many of those for me to go into now. But suffice it to say that there is a great toolbox that is available to patients through therapy and exercise.
So we jumped ahead here, and on the screen you can see the variety of exercises that are available for anybody, and specifically people with Parkinson's. But let's back up a little bit, Heather, and talk about what exercise helps people with Parkinson's. We get this question a lot. What's the best exercise for people with Parkinson's, and how do you answer that question?
I get that question every single day, multiple times a day, and my answer is that the best exercise for someone with Parkinson's is the exercise that someone will do and will continue to do. So that is going to depend on what you enjoy doing. So, you know, I have people who do not enjoy going on the treadmill, and I have people who would much rather be on the bicycle. I have people who would much rather get into the pool than to be on land. So it's really the job of the physical therapist or the exercise instructor to find out what exercise will motivate you, what one seems like it would be fun for you that you would keep doing, and what would be the one that would be most challenging for you. So if we really want to think about how the brain changes and then how the body is changing with that, we really need a structured, slowly progressive program that really, again, like Jimmy said, it's very goal-directed. We need to make sure that the exercises that people are performing are frequent, so we need to do them more than just one time a week. And we need to make sure that we increase the challenge. And I think Jimmy will talk a little bit more about how when he could do one thing well, how he would take it up to the next level. So we really get people to kind of push the boundaries of what they're able to do. So when you look at that list here, we have tons of things from aerobic exercise, and aerobic can take many different forms. You can consider dance a type of aerobic exercise. Dance could also be in the balance category as well. I mentioned boxing before. Jimmy, of course, is going to talk a lot about the running, but if you look at the list, you know, and this isn't even a full comprehensive list, we want to say to you, what's the one that looks like it's going to be the most fun to you? What's something that you can see yourself regularly doing? And then how can we help you to stay motivated in order to do that? So honestly, the research does not support one exercise program over any of the others. What it does support is that the exercise, again, is directed to what you want to correct and what you need help with, that it's performed frequently, repetitively, and that we push the intensity.
And
that's so important to stress.
I'm sorry, if I may add to this real briefly here, is that I've actually done something from every one of these categories over the last 6 or 7 years. And then when people ask me, what's the best exercise for me, I echo everything that Heather has said. And but for me, it's it could also be a combination of these things. Let's just not look at one thing and focus on that. Early on, when I started doing a lot of exercising, I was doing just running. But, while that's great, but then you also have to strength train for me. But so it's not just finding one thing. It's finding maybe a combination of things that will not only keep things fresh because you have a different type of workout that you're going to every other day or every day. It keeps things fresh. It keeps you want to keep doing it because you're not bored of the routine, and it doesn't become that routine. So, it's not a single, there's perhaps not one single thing that you can do that's best for you. What's best for you could be a combination of things.
Absolutely.
I like that, Jimmy, and you talk about challenging yourself. I think what's important on here is to stress that everybody can and should exercise. And no matter what you're interested in, no matter your fitness level, what symptoms you have, where you are in your course of Parkinson's, if you like to exercise by yourself, if you want to be in a group, if you have depression, if you can't get motivated, there's something for you. And it's just important to start exercising, to get out there and do some form of exercise. Something we get asked often and we've talked about before is, how do you know how much to push yourself? Jimmy, you talk a lot about pushing yourself and challenging yourself and setting a goal, but how do you know when you've hit your limit? And Heather, I'd like you to also answer this question and how you work with patients to figure out their limit. But Jimmy, how do you know your limit? You push yourself pretty hard being a ninja warrior and running marathons, but, everybody's got their different limit, Parkinson's or not. How do you know your limit?
Yeah, I think, the limit for everybody is, of course, very different. But for people that are starting out, that are still new to their exercise routine, you would start with a set prescribed routine. For example, maybe you're working with a personal trainer, maybe you're working with a physical therapist. We'll start with a recommended workout. And then if you feel that that's too easy for you, and you'll know because you can do more. And then so you'll add to that in the next session. And then you'll keep adding to it every single session until your body will ultimately tell you, that's enough, we're done. And then when you get to that point, then that's your limit. And then so that becomes your benchmark. For me, that's what I use. It's not something that you may know right away, but once you train enough and you've done enough, week after week of committing yourself to exercise, then your body will start to tell you when is enough. And of course, with Parkinson's, you feel different every day. So it's not, sometimes
your symptoms can fluctuate day to day, is what you're saying.
Exactly. So your body, when you get more and more into your training program, your body will start to tell you when you've had enough. And you should just, for safety, you should listen to your body. But just make sure you keep a track of your baseline. And that baseline is what you're trying. When I say push yourself, is push yourself on that baseline. Improve on that over time. Not necessarily every single session. You will definitely burn yourself out if you go that route.
And Heather, anything to add to that?
Absolutely. I think Jimmy hit a lot of the points right on the nail on the head, but I'd like to say that on the opposite end, I have people who worry about, as soon as they've started a new routine, and this has nothing to do with the Parkinson's, just with a body that hasn't been in motion for a while, they feel like they've injured themselves. Wow, I'm really tired. I'm really sore. I was a little more stiff when I got up this morning. There are certainly healthy levels of fatigue and healthy levels of soreness that, again, a physical therapist or a trainer can help guide you to, and that will become less and less as you go through. And I think, again, Jimmy's point about not looking at day to day, but you might want to look more week to week and see how that progression and those changes are. And, of course, if you're in a medical setting, we can always take a look at heart rate. We can take a look at blood pressure, your respiration rate, things like that. But there's many different ways that we can help you then to learn how to guide yourself at home.
Maybe keeping a log as well might help you track those sorts of things and seeing how you're feeling too.
Absolutely.
Another question that, Heather, maybe you can help answer. Can exercise actually make you worse? Can it make your symptoms worse or make your disease worse?
Gotcha. That's a great question, and we get that all the time. One of the main things that we will notice in people with Parkinson's disease who have tremor is while you're exercising, the tremor can actually get worse. We know that any kind of stress, whether it's good stress or bad stress, and I say bad stress if you know you're having problems with anxiety and things that are really kind of upsetting to you emotionally, but good stress, exercise, being excited for something. So you actually will see an increase in tremors while you're exercising. That does not mean that the tremors then increase over the long term. They do go back to where they were. But of course, if you lift too many weights, if you go too far, if you overdo anything, you can absolutely injure yourself. And again, that has nothing to do with the Parkinson's disease. That's just a normal course of overactivity for a human body. And we know, though, that people with Parkinson's disease, it might be a little longer for them to rebound from that. So absolutely, that's why we really look for people to ask for guidance from the medical community or personal trainers to really see where they should be.
Really helpful information. We also see on the slide there that, again, based on your symptoms and your abilities, you may want to kind of tailor your exercise. And again, Jimmy's kind of on one end of the spectrum, running these obstacle courses, being a warrior, running these marathons and things. But then you have people who maybe are not as mobile or are in wheelchairs or those sorts of things. What kind of advice can you give them for exercising?
Absolutely. That's another question that I'm asked often, and fortunately I have personal experience from running. Right now we're going on almost 17 years, a group exercise class of mostly seated exercises and people who are ranging from the age of 65 up to 94. So I always say to people when they join my class, they think, oh, this is going to be too easy. How hard could it be to do a chair exercise class? And I challenge them, and I've never had anyone walk away saying, no, that was too easy. You can get your heart rate up. You can build muscle memory. You can challenge your sitting balance. You can stretch your muscles. You can do all sorts of things just in a seating position. There's lots of videos that people can watch. I always tell people to turn on some great music and just move in the chair to the music. But absolutely, just because someone has very poor balance or is no longer able to walk doesn't mean that they can't get a full, complete exercise program.
We also had a question about, and I know you run exercise classes that also are tailored for cognition. So there were some questions on tailoring exercise for memory and thinking.
Absolutely,
what can you tell people about that?
Absolutely. So there are lots of different ways of challenging the brain from a cognitive standpoint, and I think one of the best ways is when we do exercise with cognitive things. So I will tell you that instead of counting when you're doing your repetitions, you may want to pick a category, let's say automobiles. So now you try to think of 10 automobiles that you can name instead of saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's an easy way to throw in something. We will have ways where we will have people move in certain directions, but we will say you're going to move to the right, to the left, to the right, 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 and then they have to remember those and then process that and move. So again, there's lots of ways that you can coordinate the cognitive exercises with the actual motor exercises and really get more bang for your buck.
So kind of multitasking, not just doing one thing, just running, but maybe engaging your mind while you're running at the same time.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Rachel.
If I may add here, one thing that's interesting because now that you mentioned this, Heather, is that back when I first started running, I noticed that when you're just running and you're counting your steps or you're just thinking about everyday life or whatever you're thinking about your steps, it could become mundane. But when you think about adding activities in while you're running and while you're exercising, that's more related to cognitive. I noticed that I actually got a lot more comfortable with the way that I think and I move, even while I'm running, is when I actually started doing math when I was running. Now, as a runner, we like to count things in terms of in terms of 60s, right? Because there's only 60 seconds in a minute, there's 60 minutes in an hour, and when you're counting pace or anything like that, you're doing a lot of math that's base 60 instead of base 10. And that really challenges the brain. Like, how fast am I running now? If I run just another 10 minutes, how many more miles is that? Or how many miles do I think I am from my house based on how much time I've spent running already? So that's a lot of math that's going on, and I think it helps not only the cognitive side, but it also gets your mind off of what would be a pretty mundane exercise like running. You just one step over another. It helps you get your mind off of it, and it actually makes the activity more enjoyable.
That's assuming you like math, I suppose.
Yes, that was just an example, of course, but yeah.
And Jimmy, also while we have you, people ask, how do you balance your medication with exercise? What's the best time to exercise? What kind of practical advice do you have from your own life of, traveling and running and these sorts of things? How do you have to adjust your medication around your exercise schedule?
It's all a learning process. And I want to first say that what I've done for myself is a combination over 7 years of learning and building and doing. None of this came overnight. Right? And part of that process early on was working with my MDS and just keeping track of all my exercises, the meds I'm taking, the dosages, when am I eating at certain times, and just keeping track of all that information so I know how my body feels, for example, 20 minutes after running for an hour or 20 minutes after taking a dose in the middle of a run. So I have all of that data that tells me whether or not I have optimized my medicine regimen along with my exercise. So for me, I have that built out already, and it takes a long time. I would say I didn't have that. I didn't have a complete confidence in sort of my medicine schedule for 6 to 8 months of keeping track. But I was doing a lot of exercise. So, what I would suggest is that everybody, you do keep track at some level of how you're feeling when you're taking medicine. Because what you can find is that, for me at least, so it's different for everybody, but what you can find is that when you're running, you could require more, like I do. When I run, I actually take an additional pill every hour when I'm running a marathon. But when I'm cycling, it's less. It's every 90 minutes. But normal every day when I'm in the office or just walking around with the family, then I take a dose every 3 hours. But again, this is something that I worked with my doctor on. But I believe it has helped me optimize my daily release and daily activities with medicine and exercise together.
So just like symptoms are different and the type of exercise you choose is different, it's about kind of figuring out when the best time for you to exercise is. It's about figuring out the best time of day, when your medications are optimized during the day, when your energy level is at its peak, and it's probably kind of about working with your doctor, keeping a log to find the optimal time of day for you to exercise and how much medication you might need at that time. Great.
Exactly. Find the trends, right? Find the trends that works for you, and then exploit those trends.
Great. Anything to add there, Heather?
No, I totally agree with Jimmy. Absolutely. I think managing it absolutely with your physician first and foremost, but then, logging things down and writing it down can be very helpful when you have your appointments and help you to remember how you were trending.
Great. So we talked a lot about exercising, but how do you actually get started exercising? We talked about, it's important to get started as soon as possible, but it's really never too late. It's, better late than never. I think, first of all, making sure you talk to your doctor about, what symptoms might get in the way of exercise, what symptoms are important to balance with exercise, if you have low blood pressure, for example. But then, seeing a physical therapist, somebody like Heather who, if possible, who has expertise in Parkinson's. Heather, talk a little bit about how somebody gets to see somebody like you, how somebody can find somebody like you if possible.
Sure. So we're very fortunate that there are some wonderful avenues now for physical as well as occupational therapists to get specialized in that. Through the American Physical Therapy Association, which is our governing board, we do have specialized courses in Parkinson's in the neurologic and geriatric specialty arenas. There are also specialized programs such as Allied Team Training, which is through the Parkinson Foundation. And then there are some wonderful organizations that have some great research-based programs that we can do. And again, LSVT Big is one of those programs. One of the newer programs that's out there that is just coming onto the forefront is Rocksteady Boxing as well as Power. And those two programs are based on some research that's been out there about how we promote exercise. So going on to the different local organization websites, so the American Physical Therapy Association, you can go on to the Parkinson Foundation website, you can look at the website for LSVT Big, and they'll help to lead you to those of us who are specialty trained. If you are in an area that you don't have someone who has a lot of training in that, then you want to call around and you want to look for a therapy team that at least has some experience in working with people with neurological conditions like Parkinson's disease or perhaps in the geriatric arena. After that, you're going to look for perhaps someone that your physician is comfortable with in your local area. And then after that, if you're really at a loss to find a therapist, there are programs that do train personal trainers that can have a little more experience, again, working with people with Parkinson's disease. And when all else fails, you want to look for a group exercise class. And I think, group exercise classes are wonderful on their own, but I think that they're also in conjunction with a regimen of physical therapy can be a fantastic combination. And again, if you live in an area that doesn't have a exercise program that is specifically for individuals with Parkinson's disease, I guide some of my patients, let's look for a water aerobics class. Let's look for just a dance class. Let's look for Zumba. Let's look for some sort of an arthritic class. Because some motion is better than no motion. So there are avenues for everyone out there, and hopefully we can help to direct people to the right arena for them.
And those group exercises can be really helpful. Those group classes can be really beneficial at helping avoid the isolation that can sometimes go along with Parkinson's, or the apathy or the difficulty getting motivated. So those are a good way at keeping yourself engaged too.
Absolutely. They really help you get
therapist. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that those group exercise classes also, people start to look out for one another. Why weren't you here last week? I missed you at this class, or I noticed that you're not working this hard this week. So that buddy system can really be help with motivating and help to challenge each other.
And there are also different levels, right? When you go to Rocksteady Boxing, for example, everyone isn't at the same exact level of fitness, for example.
Absolutely. There are classes for seated individuals. There are shorter classes. There are longer classes. There are higher level classes where people are jumping up and down and getting on the floor and getting back up. So yes, everyone will be assessed correctly and then placed into the appropriate level class for them.
Now, for example, when you see a physical therapist, if I saw you for the first time, what do you do at a physical therapy appointment? How do you help me get started and continue me along in a program if I have Parkinson's disease?
So we take a lot of time to really get to know you. So one of the things that we want to know is, how has Parkinson's impacted your life? How has it changed you, not just from a mobility standpoint, we can physically see the changes in walking, and we can physically, test things like balance and the ability to get up and down from the floor and the bed, but we also want to understand, what is your quality of life like now? What's your mood? How are you feeling about your own body? Do you have confidence in your ability? Are you feeling more isolated because you're less confident and you don't go out as much to do things? So we really want to know you as the whole person. So we do a lot of those physical assessments, but we also ask you questions about, what are you doing to have fun? What are you doing to really have joy in your life? And what are some of the things that Parkinson's may have sort of taken away from you? And do you think that we could work together to get those things back? And when you're able to identify those things, that really does help to motivate individuals to be like, you know what? I'm missing going to this certain book club that I used to go to, and you're telling me that if I do these certain exercises with you, then my balance is going to improve, and then I'm going to feel more confident, and then maybe I'll start going back to my book club, and then I'm going to start to feel a little more engaged in the community, and my mood is going to improve. So it's really multifactorial to help that person be the best person that they can possibly be.
And you also help them work on specific things, right? When they are having falls,
absolutely,
or they're having muscle cramps, or okay.
Yep.
And
whatever they tell us.
We did.
Yeah. So whatever people will tell us.
One question on dystonia or muscle cramping in Parkinson's. Do you have any recommendations on exercises for that?
Yeah. So dystonia can take many different forms. Typically, we get a lot of people who will get dystonia into the foot, where they'll get cramps in the calves, or they'll get kind of twisting into the feet. So one of the things that I always say first is talk to your physician about making sure your medications are optimized, make sure you're getting proper hydration, proper rest, and then whatever direction that the muscle is being pulled in or cramped into, then we're going to help you to get a stretch into that position. I also find that when we do weight-bearing exercises, so things where we're using our own body as resistance, you could probably think of a squat or moving from sit to stand, as well as an aerobic exercise like biking, that can be really helpful with making people to feel much more comfortable through those cramps.
And one thing, if I may add here, that I found helpful for me is the strength training aspect of this. I do experience dystonia, particularly in my feet as well as my shoulders and my arm. For those who have seen footages of me running, you'll notice that every photo and every video, my right arm is stuck in the same position. So that happens. When that does happen, though, I think the strength training around the counter muscles against that pull has been really helpful for me. So, if my toes are curling underneath, I'm actually, in some of my sessions, I'm actually working on the muscles on the top of my feet and my shins so that I can pull against that when those things happen. So I just wanted to add that because it has helped me a lot over the years.
Very helpful. Anything to add on weightlifting or strength training in particular for Parkinson's, with or without dystonia, Heather?
Again, it's a wonderful exercise, but it's not just as simple as doing the weight training. It always has to be followed by different things. So you've got to add in that aerobic exercise. You got to add in your balance. But the research shows that it really can be helpful for, again, maintaining that strength and really being helpful with posture. And like Jimmy said, with the ability to push oneself up off the floor if you have a fall.
Great. And then one more question on fatigue. You're kind of in a catch-22 with fatigue in Parkinson's because you kind of feel too tired to get up and go exercise, yet we tell you to go exercise if you have fatigue because that's one of the best management strategies for fatigue. So how do you manage that in Parkinson's, Heather?
Absolutely. So I always am very honest with my patients, and I let them know it's probably going to feel worse before it feels better. Because just without Parkinson's, you have that normal level of fatigue that follows exercise until you get to a solid base of the exercise. So I'm very realistic with my patients. We do use a lot of logs, so we have people write down how they're feeling. And a lot of times people don't realize how much they're actually able to do more with less fatigue until they look back at that log or they look at the list that we say and we say, wow, you rated your fatigue as 7 out of 10 last week, and this week it's only 5 out of 10. So we want to make sure that it's something that people can actually measure and objectify so that they can see that there's an actual improvement in that.
Great. Another kind of logistical question, physical therapy not getting covered by Medicare. Any advice on that, Heather?
Yes. So what it comes down to is Medicare has something called essentially a soft cap. They don't tell you how many visits you can have, but they sort of tell you how much money you have in your pot of gold to work with. There are wonderful ways of working with your therapist. Medicare needs to cover services for you as long as it's a skilled service. So that means that your therapist needs to be documenting in that medical record why you absolutely need therapy to be happening, because therapy is improving your balance, it's improving your walking. And on the other hand, continuing therapy because it's preventing you from getting worse. It's preventing your falls. It's preventing you from your gait speed slowing down. So you really do need to work hand in hand with your therapist to make sure that they are quantifying everything that you're doing. It's important to understand also that physical therapy and occupational therapy do use 2 separate pots of money from Medicare. So when you have therapy with a physical and occupational therapist, sometimes that can help to lengthen the course of treatment for you. So again, I would say be very forthcoming with your therapist and ask them to explain to you what they're doing to help make sure that that's being covered for you.
Another question on medication and exercise, really trying to figure out, should you sort of take more medication to get more exercise in the day, or should you try to work your exercise within your medication? Is that more of a question to kind of just work out individually with your doctor? Is that based on the individual? Any advice there?
So absolutely, it's based on the individual. No 2 people will be alike. And that is certainly something that I always defer to the physician. I can give quantifiable information and say, you know what, yesterday, this is what you told me you took, and this is how you were able to move, and today it's a little bit different, but like Jimmy said before, every single day can be different when you live with Parkinson's, even if you take your medication at the same time. So I truly would advise people to speak with their physicians about that.
And I think that's the important thing to remember, Parkinson's or not. I mean, and Heather, you can add to this too. When I exercise every day, and I have up and down days, depending on if I sleep well, if I'm stressed out, or, my days with exercise are different. So I know it's exacerbated with Parkinson's, but, you've got up and down days as a human being, and as an individual. So just remembering that you're going to have different days with your symptoms and things. So keeping a log, keeping a diary, paying good attention to your own body and your medications and how those impact things.
Yeah, one more thing I'd like to add to that is, I'm sorry, just one last thing is also know what is caused by Parkinson's and what isn't. A lot of times a muscle ache can be confused with Parkinson's symptoms, but in reality, it's overwork or overuse. And I think it's important to have to be distinguished between the 2, because then you know how to treat it better, and that will get you back on your exercise routine faster if you know how to treat different ailments from exercise.
Great. And then one last question before we move on from here. Can exercise prevent Parkinson's? Heather, can you start with that?
There is some research that indicates that people who have done certain levels of exercise do have a decreased risk for Parkinson's disease, but I don't think that we have a concrete answer to that yet, Rachel.
Yeah, I think based on large population studies, we see when we look at big groups of people, it may be that the people who exercise develop Parkinson's at lower rates. There's an association with exercise, but it's not a causation. So certainly it's good for you. We would recommend it in everybody, but the data is not there fully. So let's move on. And Jimmy, we want to hear a little bit more from you. We know you're a big exerciser, you're a big proponent, but you weren't always. So we want to hear more about your diagnosis, how you got to exercise, and then how you got to be an American Ninja Warrior. And we need to know what a Ninja Warrior is, because not everybody in our audience knows what that means. So take us a little bit more through your journey with Parkinson's and to exercise, and then ultimately to becoming a Ninja Warrior.
Yes, sure. So just like you said, Rachel, it wasn't always, I was not always a Ninja Warrior, right? And for those who don't know, American Ninja Warrior is a competition, television competition show that sets up obstacles for competitors to run through, and they range from, running across rolling logs to hanging on an obstacle for what could be minutes at a time, testing upper body strength. But it just didn't come overnight, as I mentioned. In fact, when I was diagnosed back when I was 27 years old, I immediately went into isolation and went into denial. I didn't want anything to do with Parkinson's. I didn't even look for resources that can help me. In fact, I didn't even tell my wife about it for a couple more months. But I think that was probably one of the worst things that I could have done for myself, is giving in to a diagnosis without having to try different treatment options and different things that I could be doing immediately to help my own situation. Unfortunately, I let the disease progress for the first 8 years, where I became very angry at just about everything. And that comes from frustration, because my body is not the way it was. And at such a young age, it's really difficult because I couldn't keep up with my kids. I couldn't keep up with my family. Everything at work was making things worse. It's just that it just wasn't a time of in my life that I wanted to go back. And it was at one point where I fell down the stairs carrying my son. And I knew then that I had to make a choice. I can continue down this path and be a burden to my family, or I can try to do something about it. I participated in many clinical trials, and what I noticed is that there's what's the one similarity between all different clinical trials, no matter what we were doing in those trials. Could be just answering questions, or it could be actually have some type of treatment involved. But everything that was consistent about it is that there's a physical activity component to these clinical trials. And I found that whenever I had a session with a physical therapist in forced exercise trial, I would feel better. And really that's what got me going, is that I started adding more movement and more exercise to my daily routine. And then with that, over time, I built confidence, where I can start to do more. And I felt confidence in leaving my cane behind because I wasn't falling over it as much. And then just taking it every week, I was pushing myself to increase my baseline by at least 10%. So I started with just walking. That walking became running, and that running became more running. The next thing I know, I was doing 5Ks and 10Ks and half marathons and marathons. And then the weight started to come off. I was getting stronger, but ultimately there's still that routine. I'm doing the same things over and over again. So I started adding swimming. I started adding cycling. Ultimately, I did a triathlon. And it's just keep on pushing myself. American Ninja Warrior came calling. Well, they didn't come calling, excuse me. I decided to take an attempt at applying for the show because my daughter was really into the show. She really felt that that was something that I can do, because in her eyes, Dad was Superman. She's never known me without Parkinson's, but she sees all of the running that I've done. But it was really because of her that I took a stab, and I took a chance and really changed my training regimen to include more strength training, to include more balance training. And I have to tell you, I got hooked because it also helped improve my daily function so much, making my body stronger in more ways than just running and endurance, that I kept going. So we applied for the show, and totally not expecting them to call, and then they called, and that was 2007, And since then, I've kept up with still a lot of running, but more importantly, I think all of the functional movement that I've done now with training for American Ninja Warrior has helped me more in my daily activities than perhaps running did on its own.
And let me say this too. This is Akbar Gbajabiamila, host of American Ninja Warrior. Jimmy's run, I think back to a couple of years ago, my father has Parkinson's disease, and one of the struggles for me, we found out in 1998 and really didn't have a lot of information, but was to encourage my dad to get moved. And of course, all of the symptoms from PD, just, there's a form of depression where you're kind of in shock, and then your muscles and your body starts to betray you, and it can be hard to get active, and everything is not functioning correctly. But when I saw Jimmy run that course, and we're calling him, I can see him visibly trembling, and it just like, whoa. And I remember just telling him we have the luxury of having this stuff done before it actually airs. And I called my dad and was like, you got to watch this, because it was really an inspiration. Now, obviously, my dad and Jimmy are, there's a big gap in age, but just the idea of getting movement. And my dad does his own little movement now, but it was hard in the beginning for my dad to kind of get out and do some of the exercise stuff. He's not able to go jogging and lift weights and stuff like that. He's 70 plus years old, but just seeing Jimmy as, an athletic guy with PD really changes the landscape and the way people feel about it. I was actually at Universal Studios doing a satellite media tour in Los Angeles, and this couple out of, where were they from? I want to say like Montana. It was just one of those states I've never been to. And they came up to me and was like, we're a big fan. I said, oh, thank you so much. We love what the story with Jimmy and Parkinson's. And this is the wife talking to me. She says, my husband's over there. He has Parkinson's. And it just really just froze me for a second, because I thought I was the only one being impacted by Jimmy's run, because I know how personal it was for me to see him out there. And just to know that Jimmy's story, and sometimes you never know this. You just don't know how this, seeing other people with your condition really helps to spread the message of staying fit.
Yeah, it certainly raised a lot of awareness. Let me say thanks so much for joining us. We know how busy you are, and we really appreciate you taking time to join us and join the conversation. But, it's really raised so much awareness about Parkinson's and about exercise with Parkinson's. But it's really been motivating. And it's funny because, Jimmy, you shared that some people are really angry because they say, I can't get out there and run a marathon, and I can't get out there and be a ninja warrior. But you say, you just have to do something. You just have to exercise to some degree. And Akbar, how do you motivate a loved one to exercise who can't be a ninja warrior, who can't run a marathon? What would you share there?
Well, I would first say that I told Jimmy, and I feel like I'm plenty capable of doing a lot of things, but I think he's absolutely nuts. I mean, I did the calculation. I literally did. And he's ran the essentially from Los Angeles to New York. I think he might have done that a couple of times because he's run so many of these marathons. But that's a lot of marathons. I think it's about 1,600 miles, 1,500 miles in marathons that Jimmy Choi has run. And look, and he's special, and that's why he's an athlete. He's a superior athlete. And the idea that I'm calling Jimmy Choi shouldn't be a shock to people, a superior athlete with PD. And so it's okay. It's not a sentence to not be active. And yes, your body's going to experience things that you're not familiar with, but definitely he's a sign that you can push through it, that you can work up to something. And Jimmy, you heard in this story just about, having to go through the body transformation. He wasn't always the fittest guy in the room. He was, Jimmy, correct me if I'm wrong, you were 300 pounds plus or close to it, correct?
I was 240, 250, yeah. So for a guy my size, it might as well be 300.
Yeah, 300, right? So yeah, but
yeah. So it's a very good point, Akbar, and I want people to know that again, I didn't always start where I am now, and it is about getting out there and doing the uncomfortable. Right. We talked about earlier in the session. We talked about people sitting down doing exercise. So, I mean, at one point, that's where I had to start because I was walking with a cane and I'm not able to run. So I had to start seated. So, you know, fast forward how many years later, hopefully that can motivate others that, you know what, hey, one person did it. And I'm not special. I'm the same guy I was 7 years ago when I started. If one person can do it, definitely more than one person can continue doing it.
Well, I'll say this, Jimmy, you are special because for me, as a son of a man, a strong man, that, you know, for my father to have Parkinson, it was very hard for me. You know, to answer your question earlier, we said, how do you motivate someone with Parkinson's to get active and to go out and do other things? I didn't know enough in the beginning, and the first thing I did was defer to my father as far as how he was feeling. So I really just became, if he said he couldn't do something, I'm like, well, I don't know enough not to tell him what to do or to encourage him. So I think having people out there who are active, who are great examples of what it looks like, because I think you hear Parkinson's. For me, I remember in the beginning, the first thing that came to my mind was, oh, Muhammad Ali, Michael J. Fox. That's all I knew at the time. I didn't know anything else. And so who am I to speak to my dad and say, Dad, you got to get moving, because this is right before I went into the NFL. And, you know, he has 2 kids at the time playing in the NFL, and, you know, we just didn't know enough about it. So, you know, I think it's a great idea just having ambassadors like Jimmy Choi to be able to see, for guys and women with Parkinson's, to see people like that, and then encourages like a son like me who was in disbelief that my father had Parkinson's. It was hard for me. I mean, if you remember the movie Coming to America, and, you know, and the father, you know, King Jossi Jaffer, I mean, that was my dad, the thick Nigerian accent. He's 6'3", 300 pounds. When he spoke, you just got scared. I mean, it was just, I mean, and then to look back and like, how can my dad have Parkinson's? It took me a long time to just wrap my head around that. I was like, there's nothing that can happen to him. But I'm pretty sure every kid sees their dad that way, the way I saw my dad. And, you know, yeah.
So now you've been inspired by Jimmy, and you're engaged, and you're an ambassador now. You are getting motivated in the community and committed to the community, and you've taken steps to get involved. Tell us about those.
Well, I think it's come from me. The reason why I wanted to get involved with the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and because of Jimmy Choi and just bringing the awareness, but also, too, so people who are around folks with PD, they are empowered, because I felt through that entire process, we weren't empowered. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to help, how to encourage, and that is important. That's just as important as the other elements of Parkinson's disease, because it's a community. I mean, and that's what the Ninja Warrior is all about. Ninja Warrior is about family and community. I mean, when you watch the show, yes, these are ordinary people doing extraordinary things, but what's more extraordinary is how they come together and they help each other when they can't figure out these extremely difficult obstacles. But they work together, they share notes, and yet they're competing for the same $1 million. That, to me, is community, and that's the essence, to me, of life. And that's the only way we're going to figure this Parkinson's things out and find a cure for Parkinson's, is working together as a community.
And so you've joined the Michael J. Fox Foundation board, and you have an event coming
up
in
August.
Tell us about Parkinson's.
Yeah, well, so, you know, for those who are familiar with the show American Ninja Warrior, I like to do a lot of wordplay, and I thought this was great. One of the base fundamentals for American Ninja Warrior is parkour. A lot of them have some form of parkour background, and I thought parkour for Parkinson's would be great. It's a nice alliteration, but also, too, brings awareness to the idea, to PD, but we want to raise money. August 5th at Dojo Boom. In fact, one of the fellow Ninja Warriors has a gym called Dojo Boom in Thousand Oaks. We're looking to raise $350,000 to find a cure for Parkinson's, and I wanted to do something different. I've been to a lot of different events. I've been to golf tournaments and galas, and a lot of them have been surrounded around celebrities, and I didn't want to do a celebrity fundraiser. I wanted to do something that was based on community, on family, sort of the same pedigree that we have on the show. It's all based around community and family, and so I want to invite the entire community out to come, bring their kids, learn from real-life ninja warriors, how to do some of these things. The kids, it's a big-time hit with the kids. And so I want to encourage mom and dads to bring their kids out, learn from some of the best ninja warriors, and all while trying to raise money to find a cure for Parkinson's. I'm excited. This is my first fundraiser I've ever put on, never done anything like it. I've got an amazing team working with, my manager, the Michael J. Fox Foundation. So it's extremely encouraging knowing that we're going to be able to contribute. And this really came about because, again, and Jimmy doesn't know this, but I've said it in some form or fashion, but just seeing what he meant to me, from my family, just inspiring, I thought, how can I use my platform? And if there's anything I would love to do is I can say to myself or know to myself that I was able to use my platform for good to be able to raise money, raise awareness.
Well, it's so fantastic, and we're so grateful to you. The community is so grateful to you. We're just nearing the end of our hour, so I'd like to ask each of you, exercise or not, what message do you have for our listeners living with Parkinson's disease? And Heather, maybe I'll start with you.
I think my message would be, it's never too early and it's never too late, and there's always someone out there who is willing and ready and able to help you do it.
Great. Jimmy?
Yeah, so my message is simple. It's just to go out and try something new. And one thing about something new is it could be something that you've given up because you have a diagnosis and that you just didn't do anymore. But, doing it again is trying something new with the disease. So go out there and do something new, and you'll find something you'll like and keep doing it.
And Akbar?
And for me, I know Parkinson's is tough because just watching and learning from my father, the things that he struggled with on a daily basis. But I would just encourage all of those, depending on where you are with PD, I would just say look up, stand up, and don't ever give up. Keep pushing.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, Jimmy, Heather, and Akbar, for sharing your experiences and expertise. We'll be sending you a link to the webinar on demand to listen again or share as you like. Thanks again, and everyone have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.